Good afternoon. Welcome. Hi, everybody. My name is Howard Fudno. I am the chair of the Fine Arts Department at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. And on behalf of the Fine Arts Department, I would like to welcome you to today's gathering. Before I do that, I do want to acknowledge that the Minneapolis College of Art and Design is located on traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of indigenous people. This is the ancestral homeland of the Dakota and Ojibwe peoples who were forcibly exiled from the land because of aggressive and persistent settler colonialism. We recognize that this place has a complex and layered history. As a community dedicated to creativity, MCAD is committed to ongoing efforts to support and advocate for American Indian nations and peoples. I hope everyone is doing well today. I hope you're all happy, but you are probably not the happiest person in the room because that person is probably me. I am so honored and grateful to introduce Victoria Martinez, whose work stitches together communities and histories and that welcomes viewers from so many places. A brief trip into the past, because Victoria was one of our students once, and we tend to take for granted right now that we can take classes called Art and Community and the Stitch Surface and weaving workshops and soft sculpture classes, but this was not always the case. The fact that artists who do those things are supported is largely due to the work of my predecessor, Karen Worth, a visionary woman who is here in the audience and really advocated for these things and that are now really the core of our mission. I don't think that was the case when Victoria started here. I think she was a bit of a groundbreaker. And probably has been for her whole life. With a background in public art, Victoria Martinez erects fiber-based paintings and large-scale installations that produce conversations with ancient and modern architecture. Contesting fabric's traditional associations with craft and the decorative, she transforms swaths of cloth into structural elements as a way of honoring her Mexican heritage and connecting with the land and the landscape. Her work is inspired by ancient sites, by architecture and the urban environment. She has exhibited at the National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago, the McNay Art Museum in San Antonio, Texas, and Museo Universitario Del Chopo in Mexico City. She was the inaugural artist selected through the Climate Engagement through Art in Cities Fellowship and led a mural project with Yale University and the city of New Haven, Connecticut. Her work has been supported by the Actos de Confianza grant through the National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures and a travel grant through the Theaster Gates Rebuild Foundation. She holds a BFA from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design and an MFA from Yale University School of Art. This fall, she installs a solo exhibition at the Poetry Foundation in Chicago called Frente de la Vida, Facing Life, an exhibition of murals and ceramics that respond to the life and work of Peruvian poet and activist Magda Portal. She has an upcoming solo exhibition at Mindy Solomon Gallery in Miami and a group exhibition at the Arizona State University Art Museum. Please welcome from the vibrant and mural-covered Pilsen neighborhood in Chicago via New Jersey, where you're currently living, Victoria Martinez.
Hi. It's such an honor to be back at MCAD. I learned so much from this institution, and I'm very grateful to be an alumni from MCAD. I'm originally from Chicago, and at the age of 18, took a risk, and I ended up in Minneapolis, and I learned a lot through MCAD and through facing a lot of hardships during the time, and also um, having professors who challenged me on the daily. So I'm grateful for that experience, and I really believe that my education here prepared me for Yale University, which I just graduated from in 2020. So I'll begin with my work of art that's here. So this was in 2011. So I graduated in 2010, and I was a part of the Fine Arts Studio program that Karen Worth started. So I was really interested in community-based projects and also painting murals and stitching um, like fragmented works of art, or kind of like finding scraps of materials and then weaving them together or stitching it together to create like a fresh perspective. So I went to Mexico. I had had my first residency in Puebla, Mexico, through the Architopia Foundation for the Arts. And I spent a lot of time going to different markets. Um, During that time, I hadn't been to Mexico in over a decade. And there's always the media always has a certain way of speaking about this country. But I, had a lot of fun going to different markets and going to bookstores and buying paper and different types of bags, and then ripping it apart and then stitching it together and then pasting it back. Here's an image of me doing the work on site. And I was very lucky to have someone with me to take photographs. So that's one thing that I recommend to everyone as you're working throughout your career and your experience. Even if you feel that the work isn't good, like, document it somehow. Either write about it or take photographs, because you can use that for like grant writing or to have a memory of what you made. So then this work, well, let me talk a little bit about my background too in Chicago. I spent from like 2011 to 2018, I spent my time teaching as a teaching artist in different schools and museums, but then also I was really into like collaging different scraps of like clothing. Like here where you're looking at like the sequins that are gold and turquoise, that's like an old vintage top that I would wear when I was younger. And then like the red layer on top, that's like a piece of like a bag from a grocery store for like produce. And then that's stitched onto felt. And then here's an image of my former home in Pilsen, and like my dad would sit on the chair that's in the background, and then my mom's plants, she would always take care of like plants in my home. So I like kind of took a photograph of that, and I collaged like clear plastic on top of the image, and then I also painted like an irregular shaped form that's turquoise. And for me, like the green and the turquoise represents me and my brother, and then like the plant represents my mom, and the seed represents my dad. So I love abstraction because I always want to kind of like challenge people to kind of take a deeper look at works of art. And also, I want to point out that I used to work a lot with like, I wouldn't stretch my work at all because I wanted the material to have a life and I wanted that to exist as it was and to be respected for what it is. But that kind of it things change as you go through different phases in your career. So now this is 2018, and this is at Yale University, and it was a part of our first show, like our first group show as a cohort, and it was a whole different ballpark being a student there, and because of its location on the East Coast in New Haven, Connecticut, and having like the historical factors of it being like, like a colonial space of the country, but then also the institution kind of encouraged us to have like a closed door policy, meaning that it was very competitive. But with my background in the arts and in community-based projects, I would do a lot of short-term projects with the city of Chicago. And the reason why I bring that up now is because this image that we're looking at relates to a book that I took from a project called Libreria Donceles, which is a library project that Pablo Helguera like has throughout the country here, where like he'll have a library and he'll set it up. It's kind of like a pop-up library, and then people can like read books and then take the books with them. But what I did with the city of Chicago and with Paulo's project was I created like a weaving, like a 1 day weaving project with people. So they would drop in and we would make weavings. But I really liked that book and I had it with me in Connecticut. And once I started my program or my journey there as an artist, like it was very isolating. So I kind of held on to the books that I had from Chicago. And so I recreated the book cover, which depicts like a scrap of fabric from Mexico. And then I made it into like a mural incorporating cement and paint and fibers. This is an image of a residential home. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because although like I love participating in the institution, I also believe that education can come in many forms and shapes. For example, this was hand painted by someone, and this is in the border town of El Paso, Texas. So my parents live there now, and so during my breaks from Yale, like I would go to the border town, and it was very new for me because I grew up in Chicago, and the climate is different, the political climate is different, and there's a lot of blurred lines. But I would then walk from my parents' house to like very close stores down the road, and then I would walk like another like 15 minutes, and I would end up in Mexico. So that's the very unique part of the border towns, in, involving like El Paso, Texas, and Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, because it's like literally like you're in America, and we might feel comfortable and it's like we understand the systems and like the language, and then you cross the border and then you're like in a different country, and it takes literally like 5 minutes to cross. um, so I would take photos a lot of my experiences, and then I would go back to Yale and kind of start picking and choosing like different shapes from my photos and creating like works of art. So this was my attempt to, in my pick crits, they have like pick crits there. Um, but this was my attempt to kind of welcome people into the painting. Um, and I made it like a double-sided work of art, and there's like a doorway, and the reason why I created the doorway was because I wanted people to kind of view a painting from both sides of the material, and I wanted I wanted to challenge people to actually like interact with the work since it was so competitive there. And here's the image of the Batman, and I incorporated the overhead projector. One, because I was trained as a muralist in Chicago, and one of the tools that we would use was the overhead projector. But then also, I love the ephemeral idea of kind of having like an image projected onto an institutional wall, because you can turn it off immediately, and um, that was fun for me to work with. And here are just some different like details of the work that incorporate acrylic paint, hibiscus dyes, and different types of textiles. And here's one more experiment as well. So in the studio space, like I started going to, or well, since I lived on the East Coast, I started going to the fashion district to buy textiles. So the like I was challenged a lot to think about like the economy of materials and class. So I started going to the fashion district and finding different types of silks. And then I would go back to the studio and then start painting directly on the wall. Like, so the blue that you see, that's like a layer of like cement. But then I also kind of like would dig, or I would kind of bury some of like the plastic fibers that I would find in Mexico or advertisements from Chicago, and then kind of like adhere it with more paint so it can become some type of like abstracted um, work of art that I would share with my students and professors. But then I would also travel a lot during my studies at Yale. So I went to Mexico for one summer and I traveled to the pyramids of Palenque in Chiapas. So this is one pyramid that I saw. And then these two different pyramids here are the Pyramid of the Moon in Teotihuacan in Mexico. So it's like an hour away from Mexico City. And then I would go back to Yale, and then I started no, I started to study the situation as international. I was really into like their map making and how they would incorporate different European cities and kind of like reimagine it through maps. But it was all in French, in the French language. So what I started doing was I would translate the maps from French to English and English to Spanish, and then kind of borrow from the maps, but then incorporate what I saw in Mexico, which were the pyramids. And I would also look at different historical books about Mexico and like learn about like the indigenous people or certain groups of people who like had contributions in like in astronomy and in architecture and mathematics. And then I would borrow from that imagery and then create my own screen prints. But then I would also add like different fiber paste elements and then hand stitch some fibers on top of it as well to kind of like play around with printmaking because I feel like there's a lot of rules in art in general, and I think it's fun to kind of um, rebel and like have fun as you're making work because otherwise, like, there has to be rules that are broken as long as you're not hurting anyone, you know. And I had the privilege of working with Turquasi Dyson during Yale. She was one of my professors there, and I was always talking about arts being accessible, and then I was talking about murals and then textiles, and like she would always talk to me about like how can I combine it all. So this was my first try of doing that. I found a brick on my way to the studio. I washed it. And I started layering like different pantyhose over it, pantyhose, and then like latex paint. Um, there was something very seductive about the tension between the textile and like the industrial material of a brick, and then also adding paint to kind of complement the colors was really fun for me. And then this is during the pandemic. So I graduated during the pandemic and it was not fun. And, I was traumatized because of Yale in a way, but then also like um, the pandemic happened. So that was traumatizing. And then I didn't really know what to do. And I ended up back in Chicago. And I started taking photographs of people like having tender moments in the streets or kind of in public spaces, especially because everyone was encouraged during that time to like be separated and have like 6 feet in between each other. So I've always been a fan of Sesame Street because I loved looking at videos um, in that show about like how or like it would be like images or videos of like the urban environment in Chicago or New York or any other city, but then they would highlight like the clocks in on buildings or the windows or in sculptures. So I really like that idea, and so I kind of borrowed from that from Sesame Street. And then I would highlight the like the fences from this image, and then recreate or re-envision it into like a painting, and kind of like a lot of the colors and textures were inspired by that photo, either like the color of the bricks and on the buildings or like the stripes on the fences that it comes with me on the painting. And then this is during 2021. I was living in Pilsen still, and like I didn't have a studio, so I would work a lot in my kitchen. And I spent like about 2 years making these works of art. I was teaching at the Art Institute of Chicago at the time, and I was teaching a grad course, and it was about creating. The title of the course was The Unpainted Picture. So they wanted me to teach a painting course, but without oil or acrylic. It was all dyes and different methods of textiles. So I started dyeing a lot of silk at the Art Institute. And so these two paintings took 2 years to make, and they're very small. They're like about 18 by 18 inches. But because of everything going on at that time, I it was kind of hard for me to create. But what I want to say is that even if you find yourself having a hard time or feeling depressed, um, I encourage you to make, because you never know where the paintings or whatever work of art you're making, where it's going to end up. For example, these two works of art, even if it took 2 years, I wasn't invited to be part of a DIY show in Miami. And then the late Rosa de la Cruz saw the works and she purchased them all on the spot. And I never thought in my life that that would happen. I didn't even have an idea of what kind of collection my work had entered. But had I not pushed through making the work or being sad, I wouldn't have had that experience with Rosa that led to other projects as well. And also during this time, this 2021, I met a patron in Chicago who supports me in my practice occasionally, and like he gave me access to a print shop. So I tried to make more prints, kind of like the first one that I showed today. This one is it's a guide, an alternative guide to a wall that I found or that I saw and photographed in Chicago in the West Town neighborhood. And then this is a photo of Lake Michigan. So I would go to the lake, take photos, and then like rip the photo and crumble it and then reprint it onto paper. And here, so then from 2020 or from 2019 to 2024, a lot of my friends would give me bricks, or I would find the bricks in Chicago or like in Connecticut, or in like in New York City, and then I just put my head down and started painting on all the bricks and also stretching pantyhose and different types of materials. And then eventually that led to like 300 bricks. And this was exhibited at the Chicago Cultural Center in 2024. It was part of a show titled Braiding Histories, and it was about public art and also my studies in Mexico and looking at pyramids and kind of like honoring that large scale type of ancient history. And but instead of it being like in Mexico, or instead of it being all stone, it was made out of metal and then also like textiles. So I walk a lot. I love walking almost every day to gather information from the streets. Or like I love going to archives and kind of documenting my steps as I'm walking to these spaces, because you see so many things in the world. Um, and I love to like collect those memories and then bring them back into my work, or also kind of represent that that time by drawing shoes or boots. So this is one painting. This is the front side, and then this is the back side. And this is made out of silk and also acrylic paint, and then urethane and pigments, and a lot of water too. This is the second one that was inside the Chicago rooms, which are like really large scale rooms. And I'm really happy that I worked with Daniel Schulman. He was the former curator there in the city of Chicago. And he really helped me out by giving me permission to do a lot of within the space. These are a series of paintings that are a little bit newer for me. I started to like stretch the canvas onto the stretcher bars. And for me, like as I was making these works of art, I was thinking a lot about like advertisements on like the MTA or the CTA or any type of like public transportation system. Um, so I kind of copied like the scale of those advertisements. And then these works, these I made in my bedroom. I was telling Natasha earlier that my current studio space is inside my bedroom, and I work in a section that's 4 by 8 feet. and I created these paintings which incorporate a lot of like images from my memories and travel, but then also I layer like latex paint, fiber paste, and then silk on top of the paintings, and I hand stitch it together. And for me, like I feel really happy as I make these works of art because it connects me to the spaces outdoors, but then I'm also celebrating my culture through color. And here's another painting. This is more like referenced by a photograph that I took in the 90s in Pilsen of a truck. And now I'm just gonna show you guys like a series of different exhibition shots, which are really important too. You know, like it's important to have it on with you on your website, but I don't have this on my website. But like I'm still saying, like it's still important to have because you get to share like with different proposals, like how your work looks in spaces. And this was my first time having like a solo show with a commercial gallery in Miami. And I really enjoy being in Miami as an artist. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Um, and it's a good way to kind of put your name out there because of like their different gallery systems that they have. And I also continue to make bricks, but this time, as I work with the gallerist Mindy Solomon, she and I kind of talked about like having having a pedestal, becoming a painting, so I can hold my brick. And you know, it's fun to like work with people and kind of like test out the boundaries with your work. And then this is at the Poetry Foundation in Chicago. So it's a series of murals and also of ceramic works. And I started reading the poetry by Magda Portal. She was a poet and an activist from Peru. And the reason why I selected Magda's poetry was because I had never heard of her before. And um, one thing that I try to do as the Latinx woman artist is I try not to fall into tropes. Um, and I try not to like to follow like the same types of artists that are shown over and over and over and over throughout art history. So I looked for like Magda via Google, and I started researching like different poets who were from Latin America, and I learned about her, and so I started reading her books. One of her books is called Hope in the Sea, and it also kind of gives you a description of her life and her lovers and the children she had and how many times she was exiled throughout Latin America. So the body of work that I'm showing you right now is in response to her life, but also to her poetry. And although I don't really have like a big studio, like I made a lot of these works on site, or I made like the ceramic works at a pottery house in Chelsea, in New York. So there's ways to kind of like make your work grow, and there's ways to like to exist as an artist, even if you don't have a big studio, which I'm learning right now, and I'm having a good time doing it. I'm very grateful that I can manage that. And then the window is like I wish I had my sketchbook, but I have a really small sketchbook that's like maybe like 6 inches tall by like 5 inches wide. But once you open it, it becomes bigger. But I made a watercolor painting, and that watercolor painting ended up being transformed into like a vinyl mural on the wall. And this like it's a massive um, window. It's kind of like I want to see it's probably like 12 feet tall by like 30 feet wide. And I never thought that a sketch or like a small painting within a sketchbook can be transformed into like or scaled up into this painting on the window. And this is like a view from the outside inside. And that's why like I love translucency in materials, and because I think it's very seductive, but then also there's a lot of opportunity to create like a new language when as you are layering color and texture. um, and for me that works very well, and I want to continue to explore that. Now I'm going to show you like a series of paintings or projects that are textile based, but they are all inspired by this book. So in 2018, I was a resident artist at the Theaster Gates Arts Incubator, and I started studying the African presence in Mexico. And the reason why is because I was a teaching artist in Chicago for like 8 years, and I would notice the tension between like the Black community and the Mexican American community, and it's something that I've noticed as a child too, growing up there. But I had to find some type of way to alleviate some of that. I mean, I don't have all the answers, but like I started learning through this book and other like professors at U Chicago about how like certain types of rice and the hibiscus flower and tamarind all traveled from West Africa to Mexico. And by the mid 16th century, over 30% of the population was African. So I started experimenting with like the colors of the hibiscus flower, and then I started to teach different workshops based on the flower. So it's either watercolor or um, it's either experimenting on textiles. And what I love about that process is that you can't control it. You can't control the dye. You can't control how dark or how light the flower is going to stain the textile or the paper. And I think that's very powerful because um, I feel that there's a lot of like control towards women, either if it's political or if it's domestic. There's a lot of control, and there's no controlling the flower and the dye when you're experimenting with it. So I really appreciate the hibiscus flower. And then here's a series of paintings that I made for University of Chicago, and it was exhibited at the Logan Art Center in 2022. And they're very small scale. I think they're about like 18 by like 16 inches. And then this is a larger scale painting. And again, I'm very thankful to Daniel Schulman from the Chicago Cultural Center, because this work of art that you see is like 30 by 30 feet. And he allowed me to like paint this work of art on the floor that we're looking at. And that they had just renovated the floors, and I needed to use that space because otherwise I wouldn't know where to paint the work of art. So he just gave me the green light, even if it probably wasn't allowed, but I did it, and it was fun. And um, the floors were covered in dye, but the good thing is that you can wash it off easily. But this work of art is inspired by like a ghost image that I saw in Port Chester, New York. I had a residency in Greenwich, so I would drive to New York sometimes and spend my day there and like researching like different construction sites. And so that's the inspiration for this work of art. And here's another like detail of like the painting or like the dye on its own. Oh, and then I have one more project too. So this I'm currently made in July at the Arizona State University Art Museum. So here's an image of me like adding water to the flowers. I don't At this time I don't use any mordant. I just kind of like work with the natural materials. Um, and then this is powder that's cochineal powder, which comes from like a bug located on cacti. But I just use the powder of the cochineal, which it's this material is used a lot in the beauty industry for lipsticks. And then I was working with prickly pears, and then the curator who I worked with, Alana Hernandez, she wanted me to like experiment and expand on the natural dyes that I work with. So that's why we introduced the prickly pear and the cochineal. So I started painting on a dress that was constructed for me by a former student in Chicago. And I started to paint it and kind of respond to like the colors and to the shape of the dress. And this is all with natural dyes, no mordants. And then I wore the dress. And then after I put on the dress, I started painting on like a larger scale half circle made out of canvas and or sorry, no, it was linen. And I started kind of like going or following the shape of the fabric with all of the flowers that were soaked in water. So this is the hibiscus flower, and then it was videotaped as part of a performance. And now this work of art is currently at the Arizona State University, and it's going to be on view for like the next year. So like here you can see on the wall there's the video, and then there's the dress. on the mannequin, and then there's the work of art that I painted. And for me, I think the journey of this project for me was more fulfilling when I was like painting it under the sun. It was like 117 degrees, and my skin started to like like welt and sizzle and get like. But it was so fun. It was fun because I was growing with the work of art. Um, so yeah, that's the end of my slideshow. So I'm excited to hear your questions and thank you for your time. Yes. Okay.
That scale, because many times you talking about the scale of your workspace being small, and that some of these bricks are small, but then in public they're really large. And I think you posted maybe 2 years ago an image of your work on a scoreboard at a sports arena in Chicago. So I wonder, do you think about right from the start, or is it something that's kind of flexible?
Um, I think I always think large because I was trained as a muralist. So I was always kind of thinking about how to take up space. So to work small for me is very hard. And that's something that I'm training myself in right now.
Did you have a question?
I'm sorry, I was pointing something.
Oh, okay. With a background as a muralist and then doing a lot of work in abstraction now, and also you mentioned like, I especially liked you were mentioning the situationist and like thinking about kind of the derive and like understanding the city differently or through a different lens. And you've talked a lot about looking, thinking about form and things like that. Thoughts on bridging kind of the social aspects of murals and what it can do from like a people's power perspective and abstraction, and like what role can abstraction play wherein it isn't kind of an escape from the social, but maybe a dive into a different way of seeing where you're at. Does that make any sense?
But what's your question exactly? Like,
I guess like there are these two. I'm seeing two different poles, and depending on your perspective, they can seem like opposites. But from the way that you're talking about looking at the city, coming from being a muralist, doing work in abstraction now, do you see a link in any way, like, or is it just a progression and there's a big difference between the two?
Yeah, thanks for your question. Well, right away when I think about murals, I think about bureaucracy, and like that's a big, like that's something that I face a lot, and I never really thought about it because when I was working on murals with the Mexican Museum in Chicago, they had already like had the wall selected, the paint was ready. It was just up to us as young people to create the idea. But through other experiences, it's like kind of like following a certain agenda that sometimes the artist isn't aware about. But I do feel that abstraction and muralism come hand in hand, and there's like for me like I think about the mood a lot with color and how color theory can play a major role with mural painting and abstraction. So yeah.
You spoke a lot about like how you had like a patron and like you had like all these opportunities to like display your art and people commissioning you kind of like it seems like you're making a living off of this, and as someone who's like getting closer to graduating, I'm like, how am I supposed to, make money and be alive and, enjoy my work?
So when I was in grad school, one thing that I learned through a studio visit is that every artist, we're considered to be like a castle. In order to sustain the castle, we have to work, right? We have to figure it out. And the pillars include like sales, commissions, teaching, fellowships, and I would say I think those are like the four main pillars. But I also would recommend like going to art shows and like networking, like in a genuine sense, you know, like meeting people who you want to meet and then like talking to them about the arts or whatever it is that you like. That's how I met a lot of like my patrons. But then other situations where like Rosa de la Cruz collected my work, like I was not expecting that. Um, and the whole point is that as artists we have to make and be ready to show what we're making, and you'll be surprised at how many opportunities come.
As an actor, you say that you feel that you have to fight your stereotypes, but you're also making an effort to keep your culture and keeping that connected to your art. How do you feel like you balance those two things?
Well, for me, I feel like I'm like a nerd, so like I love to like research like different indigenous goddesses, and I love it because it's you use your imagination, but you're also kind of like researching whatever text is available, and it might come from the colonial gaze, but there's other moments that they're not, that you know you can just find through traveling. Um, and I try to stick to that more, to like to read about that and then like somehow respond to that, because I think um, it's super easy to fall into the trope and like profit from that, but then it's not honest. At least for me as an artist, I want to kind of follow the tougher road and take my time to create. So.
I had like two very short questions. One about like your current art process, and then one about kind of what is looking like your future art process. Currently, I noticed a lot of negative space in a lot of your paintings, which I really enjoy. Like you carve out silhouettes and stuff, and how you go about that, how you interpret negative space in your photographs and in your paintings. And then two, of like a medium that you've been really wanting to try and how you would like to try it possibly in the future.
Okay, so yeah, I work in my room a lot, like draw, or like I'll figure out ways, like for example, like if I want to make ceramic paintings, like then I'll figure out if I'm working with a museum, if they can cover the cost of me working on the projects. And I'm never shy to ask, because we put in a lot of work, and a lot of the times we don't get paid for that work. And even after artists are done with the show, then we get asked to like edit certain texts for the show or to like translate, and that's all time and that's money. So I don't think any artist should ever feel uncomfortable asking like, hey, like, can you cover this cost for the work? Because at the end of the day, the work is gonna go to the show, in their venue. And even if they say no, then you know, then there's other ways to find support, either through selling artworks, or if you have like a patron, you know. And it sounds like it's um, hard to get a patron in the arts, but I think again, like if you, as long as you're working and you have goals, like you'll find your people who want to support you. And then in terms of more like larger scale projects or like things that I haven't made in my room yet, like I always want to exist in the public. So I think a lot about like mosaics, like large scale mosaics, like at airports or within the MTA system, which require like a larger team and more facilities. So in order to get to that point, I think for me at this moment, I should continue to make small scale paintings and then kind of like either sell them or exhibit them, and then again like little by little meet the people who are in that realm of the worlds of the art world or the public art world. So
you talk a lot about cultural and institutional critique, and I'm wondering how overt you are in that when you're putting in a proposal for a piece or in your artist statements. It seems like maybe there was some pushback of Yale or not receptive to that. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about that whole element of your work.
well, like I try to balance how I talk about my work, or like when I'm proposing something. Um, like for example, like I'm currently working on a proposal for a show in Texas, and I mentioned ICE a little bit because you know it's something, it's a form of power that's destroying a lot of families. in my community in Chicago, and it's really sad to see. But I work a lot with curators sometimes, and I have them help me with the text because sometimes I feel like I don't express myself as much, but because they're in that professional side of the arts, they help me out with the writing. Because I also feel that I don't want to come off a certain way, like or like kind of like too angry when I'm writing because I don't think that helps. But I also feel that as an artist, like I need to work with other professionals in the arts to help me with my projects.
What's a theme you wish you would delve more into? Because I see more your themes being about your surroundings and your culture. But what's something that you wish or hope that you can get started with?
I wish I was weaving. Like like I wish I was somewhere in Peru or in Mexico, like learning different natural dye processes with natural fibers and like learning tapestry weaving and like spending like years weaving away in like a mountain. And then like painting on it, you know, and creating maps. I want to create more maps, like print. I want to print make maps.
Apply for a Fulbright and go weave. I'm serious. It works. I did it.
Sounds like fun. Hi.
So I think when a lot of us hear murals, we kind of think permanent in buildings and whatnot. So for someone like you who's doing something in like exhibitions and spaces, can you talk about like what happens to your work when the show ends? Does it go on to live another life, or does it get donated, or what happens to some of it?
Let me see. Okay, let me show you one work. Like this work, because I made it on the floor, we didn't give it any time to dry. They installed it. The installers installed it the day after, and it was up for like, I think 4 months, the show. So that means that the other side wasn't drying, which means that it started to rot. And then when the show was over, we looked at the other side and we were like, okay, well, it doesn't look good. So I have a friend in Chicago who works at a school, and she told me that she can ask the lunch lady if we can place the work in the fridge because I don't know what. And it didn't turn out well, so it doesn't exist anymore. But this is why I say like documenting your work is very important, because although this project doesn't exist, I have the photos and the memories of it. But then like other paintings, like let's see, like this work of art on the window, like this is also like ephemeral, and it's like for me, I think it's a win because I have documentation. So if I want to propose like a public art project in New York or anywhere else in the country or abroad, like I have the photo to prove that I can work at that scale. But then there's other murals that still exist, and they're normally made with acrylic paint.
Sorry, I know I already asked a question, but I was one, and I know you mentioned some activism in your art earlier, but how, especially in current times, how exactly are you going about inserting current events and like activism into your work, and how would you maybe want to do that if that's something that you're looking for in your future work? Because I'm someone who wants to put more activism into my work, and I just want to hear another like artist that has a completely different medium from me, how they do that.
Okay, so let me look at this project. So with this project, okay, so currently I teach at a Montessori school. So that's one way for me to do outreach with art education. And then another dream that I have is to continue to be able to sell my work enough so then I can start like a scholarship fund for like other students who are going to art school. Because I remember being a student at MCAD, and then like the prices of paying for materials every week, I couldn't keep up with it at the time. So I really hope that I can continue to sell paintings and works of art. So if I ever find or know of a student who's in similar position like I was, like who needs money to exist in academia and to fit in and to make art, then I'll, can share like 10K per school year so they can like, make. So that's a goal. But then also with this project that we're looking at, I was required to do like a a voiceover of, or like to talk about like the project, and it might not be like me teaching, but the audio was about a girl who committed suicide in Texas because she was being threatened and bullied at school about being a Mexican immigrant, and then like people were bullying her about ICE, and then she took her life. And I talked about that and how I dedicate this piece to that young girl, because it's very like it's just very sad to me that this is going on, and I mean I have no control over it, but like the least I can do is kind of acknowledge some of these points through my art.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the idea of home in your work, and like what a special place Pilsen is for maybe people who haven't been there before. If you could talk a little bit about your work in relationship to that idea of home, and specifically to Pilsen.
Yeah, I really feel that like if it wasn't for Pilsen, I wouldn't be an artist. And I say that because that neighborhood is covered in graffiti and murals, and they have the National Museum of Mexican Art, and that's where I learned a lot about how complicated Mexico and its history is. And I feel that textiles are also like, that hits home for me because everyone in this room, like we need textiles. We're wearing textiles of some sort. And I always think about Chicago and how like, again, like if it wasn't for Pilsen and if it wasn't for the National Museum of Mexican Art, then I don't think I would be who I am. Okay. Thank you.